Are there people online? Not yet?
Might as well talk like they're on.
So could we just gather our hearts and minds and spirits together as we look to the Creator for His guidance and the work that we do, that the decisions we make will be the ones that will best serve the people that we serve. Let us be mindful to be thankful to the Creator for everything that He gives us in life, for our community, for all of the things that satisfy our hunger, our thirst, and our families, our relatives, our neighbors, and all the people that live in our community, and God's goodness to us at each and every day of our life. We celebrate the diversity of creation for the different plants and animals and the things that live in the water and that fly in the air, the forest, the beauty of nature. And as everything comes back to life in the springtime, we remember again God's goodness towards us, that life always continues. Ganjokwa sa dawon siyos go ni gariwesa ni gadi ohodon gariwatego unga de non how de agwego unska adenwe noni ne unquat ni gora dano de atenewe rado ne unque sunha suk agwego skono agonhage agwego unska adenwe noni ne unquat ni gora dano de atenewe rados ne yedetni stunha G Yoanjadi, G Sego, Diatko Hon Hajes, Ago Satstonsera, Na e Yon Hiyo Hage, Agwe Unska, Ediniwe Noni no Guat Nigora, Dano, De Tiniwe Rados ni Agwego Yon Yunk Hi Yon Wa Nawaze, G Yoanjadi, Agwe Go Unska, Ediniwe Noni ni Oni, Ne Ungwat Nigora, Dano, De Tiniwe Rados ni Agwego yok yonwaze G garon hyade. Dano ono gadi agwego de siwa ne werado ne sumbaya dizo. Nene gasat stonsera ne always answer sa oyera. Eto neo donhak ne ongwat negora. And it's my people, listen for a short time. The business has now come to pass. Everyone, we will bring our minds together as one and send our greetings to the people so that peace will continue for all. Everyone, we will bring our minds together as one and send our greetings to our mother, the earth, as she still goes along giving of her own strength for us to live good lives. Everyone, we will bring our minds together as one and send our greetings to all things that support us on earth. Everyone, we will bring our minds together as one and send our greetings to all things that support us in the sky and the heavens. And now we send our greetings to Sungwayat Dizo, the creator and the great strength of the natural world. Let this always continue in our minds. And the Christian prayer, Sungwat Niha, Negarung Hyage, Deshidarung, Wagwasanada Gondi, Sayanetra Andawat, Jinunsere, Etyawanine Hohonjagi, Jonanito Negarung Hyage, Dagyo Nego Nisaradi, Yata de Wisaragi ungunadrunk oni dondagoriosto, ne junk wari wanero, jeta de gari stonis ne rowdy, wanero uxero, ego a sisawang nagayanetzer nagasat stonsera, always onsera, Jenuhoe, awa. And if you know the Lord's Prayer, please join me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. So John, I'd like to welcome John Tour, who is the chartered accountant from Wilkinson and Company, who are the Mohawks, the Bay of Quinte auditors. And he will be presenting the audit report findings as at March 31st, 2022. John, welcome, and I'll turn the floor over to you now.
Thank you, Chief Miracle. Good evening, everyone online. Thank you for having me this evening. So to start with the financial statements, for those of you who may have access to a copy online, We'll turn to management's responsibility for financial reporting. So ultimately, these financial statements of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte are the responsibility of management and have been approved by the chief and CAO on behalf of council. These financial statements are prepared by management in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards prescribed for governments. Ultimately, as auditors, it is our responsibility to audit these financial statements. When we turn to our independent auditor's report, it is our opinion that we believe these financial statements present fairly the financial position of the band, the results of its operations, changes in net assets, and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. We conduct our audit in accordance with Canadian generally accepted auditing standards. Again, it is the responsibility of management and those charged with governance for the consolidated financial statements. As auditors, it is our responsibility to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement in order to develop appropriate audit procedures. We obtain an understanding of internal control. However, we do not do a full-blown internal control audit. We evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies and the reasonableness of accounting estimates. We conclude on the appropriateness of management's use of going concern basis of accounting, and we evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements. When we turn to the consolidated statement of financial position, we note that cash has increased by just over $22,000. A large majority of this being for projects where the cash has not been spent at March 31st, 2022. Marketable securities have increased by approximately $3 million, and this is at their cost figure. So again, this is primarily as a result of reinvested investment income along with additional funds from the OFNLP that have been put into the marketable securities. Accounts receivable have increased by just under $5 million. Of the $27 million of accounts receivable reflected at year end, we note that approximately $21 million of this figure relates to housing loans that have been given to members and are outstanding at March 31st, 2022. A large portion of the increase does result from funds from the Government of Canada, which is increased by approximately $4 million, and this is a result of projects that are in progress where funds are still outstanding from the government and were received subsequent to year end. We note that the next big item is the investment in Loyalist Solar LP. So there is a large project that the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte through a separate entity have an investment in, and this is just over $10 million at year end. And as well, there are funds held in trust of just under $600,000 at year end. We note that with respect to the liabilities, there is the Community Development Fund under administration, which is just over $3.2 million. Accounts payable and accrued liabilities are approximately $9.3 million compared to just over $7 million in the prior year. Again, tying in with those projects in process, there are various outstanding bills and holdbacks that are outstanding at year end. The next large item relates to deferred revenue, which is increased by approximately $25 million at year end. So this primarily relates to funds that have been received and have not yet been spent, in most cases for large projects at year end. And this does correspond with the large increase in cash. Again, we see that loans payable relate to regular projects are approximately $12 million compared to $8 million at the $8.5 million at the end of the prior year. The increase here primarily relates to a new fire hall loan that was received, and we do note that regular payments have been made all in accordance with scheduled payment from the various funders. and that the Yayoti solar loan relates to the solar project and the investment, and that's just over $13 million at year end. We note that tangible capital assets, which are really your capital, your infrastructure, your roads, your vehicles, everything that's used to help service the community, is just over 124,000 in the current year compared to 98 million in the previous year. So basically, you have gone up by over 25 million in terms of projects from last year, which just shows how much work was done and reinvested in the community. And ultimately, when you add all that, you get to an accumulated surplus of just over 156 million. So ultimately, when you look at that surplus, which is a good, does show a strong financial position, of which basically 124,000 of that is really tied in with your capital at year end. So that doesn't mean you have a liquid 156 million. It means that a large chunk of that is really tied in with capital projects, your infrastructure, which is used by basically the community members. When we turn to the consolidated statement of operations, we see that Indigenous Service Canada revenue is approximately 30 million compared to just under 23 million in the previous year. So again, an increase in funding, a lot of that relating to capital projects. Health and welfare, 3.5 million compared to 2.9 in the previous year. The next large item being other contributions from federal government, up to 3.1 million in the current year from just under 200,000 in the previous year. Contributions from the province of Ontario, just under 8 million in the current year, as opposed to 6.5 million in the previous year. The other large item being sort of program users, fees, etc., just over 4.3 million in the current year, as well as from your OFNLP, which includes both distributions as well as investment income, approximately 3.3 million in the current year, down from 4.6 million in 2021. You also have revenue in the current year from the, as a flow through of various sort of subsidiaries of the band, of approximately just over 800,000 from the Golf Course Limited Partnership. When we look at where funds have been spent, just under 28 million was spent for band operations, approximately 1.5 million for housing projects, approximately 3.2 million was spent under the OFNLP 2008 projects, amortization of your tangible capital assets of 4.1 million, as well as approximately 700,000 relating to your Mohawk Golf Course Limited Partnership as a flow through of your subsidiaries. And just for those of you, those are separate legal entities, separate from the band, to help protect the band. However, for accounting purposes, as they are in certain cases 100% owned subsidiaries as a flow through and or partnership, the assets as well as the operations do need to be consolidated within the band's financial statements, but they are set up as separate legal entities. Ultimately, we get a surplus of just under 20 million for the year, and again, part of that does relate to amounts that are reinvested in your tangible capital assets. When we look at sort of the statement of changes in net assets, so again, we see your acquisition of tangible capital assets at just over 30 million, amortization of 4.1 million, and then we see a change in the deposits on purchase of the golf course land and assets. So those were deposits in the previous year, and in 2022, those transactions were finalized. When we look at the consolidated statement of cash flows, so I won't go through this in much detail, but ultimately when you look at the cash from the previous year to the current year, This demonstrates sort of how those changes are sort of flow through. As an example, you may have a surplus of just over 20 million, but we see under the capital activities that cash being used for the purchase of tangible capital assets of the just amount figured just over 30 million. We see investing activities, how those funds have changed and been utilized to result in the change in the marketable securities, as well as the distributions from Loyalist, as well as the repayments of long-term debt to ultimately get to your cash figure at year end. When turning to the notes to the financial statements, I will skip through the accounting policies and go straight to the cash figures. So when we look and we see cash is ultimately, you do have certain funds that are externally restricted through housing replacement reserves, through the CMHC funds. We see funds that are internally restricted, whether it be the Community Development Fund or the Turton Pen Housing Replacement Reserve. And then we see unrestricted funds, which through your various funds, the largest being under the operating fund. But again, when you see $40 million there approximately, a lot of those funds have been received and are deferred to be used for capital projects in the upcoming year. When we look at the marketable securities, we see that the market value at March 31st, 2022 is higher than the cost of those investments, which demonstrates that the market value is not impaired compared to the cost, and that the net realizable value at year end exceeds what the amount you purchased those investments for are.
What was the net gain, John?
So the gain or unrealized gain at March 31st, 2022 is approximately 1.8 million. When we look at our accounts receivable, again, we have housing loans due from members, which is pretty comparable to the previous year at just over 21 million. But again, you would have new loans being issued as well as repayments of amounts under existing loans. We see the same, a decrease in housing loans for Turton Pen. So again, part of this would be your repayment amounts. We see other loans and receivables of just under 500,000. And then we see sort of under your due from others, we see approximately 5.4 million Government of Canada. We see 650,000 approximately from Province of Ontario. Accrued interest receivable of approximately 235,000. Other accounts receivable net of other payables. So anyone who looks at that and sees the negative figure, so ultimately there are certain amounts that may be included in the housing loans where funds have not been drawn down on, and those amounts are netted into that other figure to get to a total accounts receivable of just over 27 million. We see note 7 sort of outlines the payments amounts received relating to the Ernestown Wind Park Limited Partnership. Note 8 outlines funds that are due from Loyalist Solar LP, as well as the annual participation payments. And approximately 257,000 was received in the current year as a result of participation payments. We see note 9 outlines the investment in Loyalist Solar LP.
Just back on the wind and solar investments, so you can confirm that there's enough revenue from the sale of power to the Ontario Energy Board to cover the loan payment and plus have some left over to pay the ban. Is that correct?
That is correct. We see under note 9 the investment in Loyalist Solar LP. So the continuation of this. So again, this is from the actual financial statements of Loyalist Solar LP. And we note that the ban's position in Loyalist Solar LP being that it is not 100% owned, ultimately relates to, we see the opening balance, we see the partner distributions, as well as their share of earnings during the year. So as distributions are given out to the partnership, we see that investment decreasing.
John, the amount given to the band is the amount in excess of the loan payment required. Is that correct?
We see the partner distributions. So that amount, that $2 million, is before the repayment of the interest on the loan. And when we look at the first part in note 8, that outlines the participation payments that were received, the 257,000, in excess of the amounts that were
To pay down the
Pay
loan
down
for
the loan.
capital and interest.
correct, which is in the first part of note 9. Note 10 outlines that the band does have certain funds held in trust with Indigenous Service Canada.
John, I guess maybe so the members understand, the band didn't invest any money other than the amount borrowed to invest in the company, but a lot of the investment was our Aboriginal adder, which was basically a grant from the government of Ontario.
Correct. Note 11, credit facilities. So the organization, the band does have certain credit facilities that are unutilized at year end. Note 12 outlines the various deferred revenue. So these are sort of certain areas where the projects that are in process, that where funds are to be spent. So these are funding that has been received and is unspent at year end. So there's certain infrastructure funds, there's certain program one-time funds, as well as rapid housing funds. So these projects are all in process, and the funds just have not been spent at year end. Note 13 outlines your various loans payable. So as previously mentioned, amounts have been repaid in accordance with your existing agreements, and there's been an increase relating to CMHC projects as well as a new fire hall loan. So while you have been making your repayments in accordance with the agreements, we do see an increase in the actual overall loan amounts because of the new loans. We see the principal repayments, and we see that where those amounts is often when we might see 1.968 million due to be repaid in 2023, is often that's under existing repayment terms, but often when those loans come to maturity, they are renewed for another 5-year term to really make sure that these loans have essentially a 25-year amortization period.
John, and just to comment on note 13, the loan for the new fire hall that's to be paid back to the Bank of Montreal over 7 years. We are utilizing the solar, wind, and solar power, solar and wind, to pay the revenues to pay that back.
Continuing on note 14. So there is 2 loans relating to the golf course. So again, while a separate legal entity, as it is a wholly owned subsidiary of the band, the financial impact has been consolidated within these financial statements. As well as there are certain loans under the Culbertson and Turton Pen lease agreements, which will ultimately be either repaid or extinguished as part of the various settlements.
John, the loan funding from the government for the Culbertson negotiations have been repaid this year.
Yes. So While these statements are at March 31st, 2022, that subsequent to these financial statements, the Culbertson amounts have been repaid, as the chief just mentioned.
And that will be reflected in the audit at March 31st, 2023. This year's audit.
So note 15 outlines the loans payable for Yayoti LS Solar Inc., which is, as a subsidiary, have been consolidated within these financial statements, as well as the interest expense relating to that, which is funded by participation payments. Note 16 outlines the tangible capital assets of the band. So we see that primarily when we look at the increase is that assets under construction of approximately 21 million has been really the major increase on a year-over-year basis. And when you see assets under construction, when the projects are finished, those amounts are put into their appropriate area, whether it be buildings, whether it be wastewater infrastructure, and or roads. So until those projects are finished, those amounts stay in assets under construction. Note 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21 relate to your reserves. So again, some of these are internal, some of these are somewhat dictated by external factors, whether it be CMHC, but various amounts have been appropriately added to the reserves in the current year in accordance with certain agreements. When we look at note 22, we see the accumulated surplus. So we see that the majority of the increase again is equity in your capital assets fund. And ultimately, when we look at these financial statements, we really sort of focus on the consolidated. However, historically, the band has kept all these amounts in separate funds for their internal accounting purposes, as well as for in helping manage operations of the band. However, when we look at this, really the accumulated surplus is on a whole. And when we say the capital asset funds, that's just your tangible capital assets.
John, just a question. On note 16, the water wastewater infrastructure, the balance at March 31st, 22 is 37,453 to 223. And but yet the net book value is 31,563 169, which is about $5 million less. Is that because of depreciation or what?
That is correct, Chief.
Okay,
so when we look at the accumulated amortization, approximately $5.9 million of accumulated amortization relating to those projects, and that is based on their estimated useful life. In certain instances, the estimated useful life may exceed and or may not be as long as what original estimates were, and ultimately that can either result if an asset is disposed of, there may be a gain, or there may be a loss / impairment at that time. But given that a large majority of these assets are not purchased to be resold, you're not reselling your roads, you're not reselling your buildings for community use in the majority of situations. So ultimately, it's when those roads are, for example, redone, then if there's still amounts on the books, then we know that, okay, at that point, there is some impairment, or if you write that amount fully down and that road is still fully operational, we note that, hey, you've maintained that road well and that it's exceeded what the original estimate for the useful life was.
John, maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, we insure these assets, all of our assets. So if we depreciate them down to zero, does that create an insurance problem if we were to have a loss?
In those instances, Chief, You're depreciating them for financial statement purposes, but from an insurance standpoint, it's basically most of your insurance is okay. We have, say, insurance on X building. What would be the replacement amount for that building? And you want to continually ensure that your insurance coverage adequately meets what your replacement value is. And us and having these assets depreciated on the financial statements has no impact on it.
Because usually a PVC water line pipe is good for 60 years
Yeah.
before it needs to be replaced. So that's the lifespan of that 60 years. Sewer pipe, I think, is something similar.
Yeah.
If it's PVC. So I guess, but we're depreciating at a higher rate, right?
Yes,
And,
so
that
that
period.
would have a longer useful life.
Okay.
Correct. So note 23 outlines the accumulated surplus of your various subsidiaries. Note 24 outlines that there are certain funds on deposit with Indigenous Service Canada that the band does not recognize, as they do not recognize the validity of the lease. So ultimately, those funds have not been included in these financial statements as the council does not recognize these monies. It's funds belonging to the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte.
And just, John, so you're aware, the government is waiting for the council to submit a proposal on settling the loss of use on Turton Pen. So there'll be a discussion about that probably at that time.
So under contingencies, we see contingent assets. So ultimately, and it is subsequent to these financial statements, essentially there is a partial settlement of the Culbertson land tract claim. And this partial settlement estimates have been included in these financial statements from a note disclosure standpoint, not from a financial standpoint, as ultimately once those funds are recognized, they will be associated with the actual financial figures in these financial statements. And under your contingent liabilities, we see that the band guarantees loans are just under, well, approximately $16.8 million relating to loans that are from primarily housing loans with the Bank of Montreal by your band members. We see note 26 outlines community development funds under administration. So quota administration fees have been added to these funds. There's been minimal expenditures and or requests under this fund in 2022, and there's approximately $3.2 million sitting in this fund at March 31st, 2022. Note 27 outlines related party transactions. So this relates to the salaries and benefits of key management and staff, as well as honoraria to chief and council. And we see amounts owing from to and key management personnel, excluding compensation. So ultimately, when you see an amount owing, this primarily relates to housing loans that the counselors and or members may have at, and or key personnel may have at year end. Note 28 is a standard accounting note in there for disclosure. Note 29 outlines that budgeted figures presented in these financial statements are unaudited. And note 30 outlines that at the date of these financial statements, COVID-19 does continue to have an impact, although however, the band has not seen a decrease in funding as a result of COVID-19 from Indigenous Service Canada, etc., etc. The rest of the financial statements, I will not go into detail. However, your statements 1 through 7 essentially show a breakdown of the various funds, which is all included within the consolidated financial statement of financial position. The next set of basically note 7, Statement 7 through basically Statement 13 outlines the statement of operations and changes in fund balances for your various funds. And your next statements after that are the separate statement of cash flows relating to the funds. You will see schedules A through that there is quite a number of other individual schedules which outline your various programs that are also included in your financial statements, and all of those figures are included in the consolidated statement of operations. And that concludes my presentation of the consolidated statements of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte as at March 31st, 2022.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any questions from the council or staff that are here? Are there any questions from the council or staff that are here? Are there any questions from parties joining online? I can't see if there are any. Can you see, Shelley? There are none? Okay. I see. Did you receive any email questions? Okay, the questions have to be emailed, and they're emailed to
Cecil.
Cecil. Oh, okay, hyphen tmd.org. Okay, so it's audit 2023. Angela, can you tell the address? Audit 2023 at MBQ
Cecil, do you know if that's the
dash
correct
20.
address?
That on the community
Yeah,
website, they're on the poster, it has the email
yes, exactly.
address.
It has on the postal there is the address, and all the questions will be coming to me after the presentation, and I will respond to them.
Okay, can you just announce the audit email address to send questions to Cecil? John, what's been posted?
I don't have
Uh,
that. Cecil would be
yeah,
the best
just
person.
give me a second. I'm just trying to open the post here, Chief. Yeah.
Thanks, Cecil. While Cecil's opening that up to repeat what the number is, what the email address is, what will happen is all of the questions that are submitted to the email address will be compiled and the answers will be produced. And then similar to previous years, we will publicly post all of the questions and the associated answers. So any community member that is interested can see what the questions were and what the responses are. And it may generate some additional discussion and result in more questions, which is always a positive thing for transparency's sake and allowing people to ask anything that they would like over the duration. So I'm going to hand it back over to Cecil.
So
Thank you, David. Yeah, the address is auditinfo@mbq-tmt.org. Auditinfo@mbq-tmt.org.
Okay, thank you, Cecil. Thank you, David. So I guess now, what's the turnaround time to answer questions that come in if you get any? How long is this going to be up upon the?
Yeah, I will
What's the
try
time
to
frame?
I'll try to keep that as a priority, and as I get the questions, I will respond to them after consulting and sharing with David and Angela.
Okay, so are you taking questions all year, or is there a time frame that the listeners need to be cognizant of?
Well, we have shared the financials audited on the website as well, and as after the presentation today, like they are welcome to send within a reasonable time frame. Yeah.
Yeah, so Chief, we were thinking in the duration probably for about a month after this.
A
People
month?
obviously questions all year if they like. It's just this email, we'll only have it up and monitor it for a month. But again, I'll reiterate that any community member that wants to know anything about the financial statements, they're welcome to come into the band office or make an attempt to contact one of us, and we will certainly reply.
Okay, could we put on the website how long this email address will be up so the members know?
Yeah, we can certainly do that, Chief. I'll ask Lisa to have Rebecca post something indicating that the email itself will be operative for a month's period for any questions.
Okay.
And again, to read
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Cecil.
any questions that we do receive. Yep.
Okay. So I think we're finished then for the night. Thank you, John, for coming, and thank you for doing a good job in our audits. And thank you, Cecil, David, and our staff who worked on this to get it ready. I know we've had some challenges this year with COVID-19 and the office being closed and people having COVID at times and being away and skeletal staff at times, but we've done the best we can, and I appreciate the work that everyone has done. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
good evening,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.